and the clammy goosefoot really hammered that, where the clammy goosefoot was a problem. That was probably like one treatment was almost wiped out by the clammy goosefoot. The mung beans, the rabbits nipped off the terminal growing points on probably 80% of the plants, so they then had to branch out, and that sort of stunted their growth. And then the sunflower, well, actually we'd estimated the sunflowers at probably about between 1 and 1.2 tonne to the hectare prior to harvest, but I don't think those sunflowers, given it was only 3.5 hectares to harvest, and it was a big job to set up sunflower trays if we didn't have any, we ended up just having to harvest that with an open front, and I reckon we lost a third to the birds and probably a third to the harvesting operation. But we'd sort of estimated, like just through plan counts and head counts and that, we think the sunflowers have done about a tonne to the hectare. So, but yeah, the millet was obviously the standout one at 2.3 tonne, and I think the best treatment was about 2.8 tonne. So that sort of gave us a bit of confidence that we were able to grow some of the crop. Obviously, we'd had a lot of rainfall over that summer, which I'll touch on later in the presentation, but at least it showed that we could grow them and get them through to harvest. I mean, there was two things that we thought about with this summer cropping. Is it not purely an opportunistic thing that if we've got a wet harvest after, say, a canola or a wheat stubble, that you come back in with something like, and mung beans is the obvious choice probably there because it's only a 90-day crop. When I was in Dubbo, if we had a metre of moisture in the profile after harvest, we could come back in and sow mung beans and pretty well assured that would get through to harvest even on that moisture that we had there. Unfortunately, the following year we were supposed to follow through to, that was why we had all the probes in there, we were supposed to follow through and then monitor what the effect on the wheat crop in the following year from all the different summer crops and compare it to the fallow, which would be our traditional practice. That's about the 7th of September. That's one of the moisture probes just there, I think. So it was reading quite well, and really we didn't make any sense out of the probes all year because we were pretty well wet from July through till still now. That paddock's only just, probably not even trafficable at the moment to get onto with the wet we've had. I think we started harvest at the end of November and through till, well, we sort of technically finished harvest in April, but we had something like 14 inches of rain over harvest, so we didn't have a lot of opportunity to get much out of the probe readings. And same thing, we also overlaid, because I mean the standout one was the millet. And that was the thing with the millet, we had no nitrogen. It was only I think it was 70 kilos of MAP at sowing. So we had no nitrogen in crop, whereas normally we would have had nitrogen applied in crop. But we didn't. We just thought, well, let's see how it goes without any nitrogen. And so the wheat after the millet was always well behind, and so we had a nitrogen trial on over the treatments to see what the response was. It was the same thing. We couldn't really assess it because harvest ended up. That paddock I'd actually harvested 2/3 of that paddock and left the centre strip, which was supposed to get harvested originally by the plot header to come through, but because all the crops started lodging, we thought it wasn't going to be very consistent for the plot header to do, and then I was just going to put them through the yield monitor. But that last third of the crop, we actually never got a chance to harvest. It was so wet, so we ended up burning it. So the only yield data we had was what we'd done from plant counts. But when you actually looked at it, it was very hard to make any real sense out of it because of the effect the water we had like that. These plots were running east-west, and then we sowed the wheat north-south, and that sort of water effect was, that's the actual creek there, but the rest of that paddock was still sort of 6 inches underwater beneath that crop. So it really put the wind up the trial, and really we didn't get the result we wanted, which was to see what the effect was on the following wet crop. And same thing this year, we haven't been able to get back in to put the moisture probes in because it's been so wet to do it this year. But this is the thing that actually, once we actually started doing the trial, we knew we were getting wet summers, so I actually pulled out. I thought it made more sense to pull out the Dookie College data, which is only 15 k's east of us, because we could go back 130 years. But I just wanted to pull out the growing season rainfall and compare what's happened, say, since 2004. So if you look at, and I broke it up to say December, March, which would be the moisture you've got after harvest that you could plan into, or September, February rainfall, which is what you'd have if you had a planned summer crop and you went in there and and left it fallow after the wheat, followed a previous wheat harvest, and then went back to a summer crop. And if you look at the averages over those 7 years, if you actually go back to the 130-year average, it's almost 400 mils rainfall from April to October, 140 December to March, and almost 300 in September to February. If you actually go back and look what's happened in the last 7 years, we've dropped to 300. So we've dropped 24% there in our what's considered our growing period. We've increased 34% over that short season, and we've only dropped by 4% in the September to February. So I mean, the sort of thing we took from that is what's the chance of having a full profile of moisture to sow a crop, comparing a winter and a summer crop? I mean, we always struggle in this stage here to get this April opening season rain to have any moisture going into the winter crop. Well, we've probably got a much better chance of actually having a full profile of moisture coming out of July and August to be able to sow a spring or a summer crop into. So I guess it's that sort of change in mindset is to, when have we actually got the moisture available, and now that we've got a system that we can sow into any sort of stubble load, how can we I guess exploit that moisture? And I guess it's that changing that mindset of perhaps thinking more like the Queenslanders and the guys in northern New South Wales is forget about what month of the year it is. When we've got moisture, we've got an appropriate crop, do we go and sow it then? And going back to what I said before about the circumstance and choice, this year was another. Geez, these things didn't show up either. We had 300 acres of chickpeas in last year, and in that September flood, they all got wiped out because those of you who are growing chickpeas, they don't like wet feet. So we lost 300 acres of chickpeas in September, and we had the option of do we just let it fallow through and sow it to wheat again this year, or do we try and use that moisture, given we had a fairly full profile of moisture overflowing really. But anyway, we actually got a rain event. It was the 18th of December, so it was the week before Christmas. So we had it was a Saturday morning. We had a summer storm came through, and we didn't have any harvesting for 2 or 3 days. So it was either I sat on the couch for 2 days and caught up on some sleep, or we put the seeder back on the tractor and we went out sowing millet. So we chose millet only because the seed cost was relatively cheap. It wasn't going to cost us a lot to put it in. And I mean, the main reason I wanted to put the millet in was the fact that if it did turn into a dry summer and we didn't have any rainfall to finish it to harvest, at least we'd have grown some ground cover, sprayed it out, and we would have, rather than that soil baking hard over the summer after the flood, twice we got floods, we got flooded again at the end of October, rather than baking hard that soil over summer, at least we'd have some ground cover to soften up to drill back in the wheat this year. But what the summer was like, it didn't stop raining. So we put the millet in, and so this millet wasn't sown until the 28th of January. I virtually had some seed left in the box, and one of the blocks had been this is actually an old irrigation block. Well, we don't have irrigation water anymore, and it had been too wet to sow in December, so I came back at the end of January just to basically clean the seed out of the box. And we sowed it, I think it was about the 28th of January, and not really expecting it to get through to harvest at all, but just really to give it some ground cover, because it's a bit of heavy clay soil. And just with the season we had, and the fact we were lucky enough it stopped raining in pretty well late March, early April, that actually got through to harvest. So we got 110 hectares of millet sown and harvested this year, and that one didn't show up. And that one there, the January sown millet went 2.4 tonne to the hectare, and the December sown millet went 3 tonne to hectare. And I mean, early indications are at this stage, well, worst case scenario, we'll end up with $400 ex-farm, but we're probably looking more like we'll end up with $500 ex-farm. So in terms of gross margin, it's going to give us $1,500 a hectare, and the only cost we had was sowing, harvesting, windrowing, and a bit of fertiliser. Yeah, it's one of those things. Millet's it's a boom or bust market. If you've got it, they don't want it. Yeah. Yep, that's right. Yeah, simple to grow, and that's why we sort of chose